אוקיי. תודה. רגע, בוא נראה שאנשים, כן, מתחילים להיכנס אלינו לוובינר. ערב טוב לכל מי שנכנס כבר, אנחנו נחכה עוד ממש, עוד 2-3 דקות. אוקיי. אנחנו משדרים כולל בלייב on יוטיוב, אנחנו משדרים בלייב ביוטיוב, במקביל, מי שרוצה לראות אותנו ביוטיוב יכול להיכנס לערוץ The Excel Studio ולראות אותנו שמה. ואני רואה ממשיכים להיכנס, אנחנו כבר מוכנים, כן, ממתין ומוכן גם כן, אנחנו כבר ממש עוד דקה, 2, אנחנו ממש נתחיל. אוקיי. Okay, we will wait something like 2 minutes to people to show up. And,
no worries.
Stuff.
This is fascinating. I've never actually seen a live user interface that actually writes from right to left before.
Yeah, this is the problem, in Power BI and in the M language also as well, because the interface is not proper right to left.
Is that right? So if you go into your M code, does it still go left to right like I have?
If you have the Excel in the Hebrew version and you open the M language editor,
yeah,
you can see the equal sign on the right side, or not on the left.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I can switch to the left side and start writing the M code, the M formula, but the equal sign is still on the right side. So it's kind of
that'd be weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. That would be difficult. I'm even trying to think like how that would work for code indentation and all that kind of stuff would just be, wow.
And the Hebrew language, the formulas are switching the letters. So because the right of the left, it's very hard to work in the Hebrew on this on the Power Query. Exactly.
I would be really, really curious because we've never tested in that environment with Monkey Tools at all. So it'd be really interesting to find out whether or not somebody. We have said we support English Excel. We don't support other languages because I haven't actually tried it. But it'd be interesting to know what would happen if what it would actually look like if it was actually manifested in this stuff or not. So fascinating. Yeah.
It's challenging.
Well, it's funny, right? Because software development, when you're, one of my friends told me years ago, when you write something for you, it's not that hard, and it doesn't have to be bug proof to a great deal because you actually know how you work with it. When you go to release it to other people in your company, you now have to actually be a lot more concerned about what other people are going to do with it. So the level of what you have to do and error handling and all this kind of stuff, has to go up significantly. And then when you go and you release it to the public, it has to go up 10 times higher because you have no idea what people are going to do with your stuff, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's interesting.
And it's a different version of Excel.
Man. Yeah, and that's one of the challenges we have with this one too, is that in the Excel world today, we have no way to actually programmatically tell whether or not you're running on Excel 2016, 2019, or Office 365. They broke the application switch in Excel 2016. Everything's been version 16 since then. So then when you get to Office 365, I also have no programmatic way to actually find out what release channel you're on. So when new features trickle in, I don't know if you have them or not. It's a tough place to go. It's our issue, but it is challenging. There's no question. So
yeah. That's why the Power BI is so good, because it's one version for all.
Well, Yes, except that when you go and teach a class in Power BI and you find out that you've done all your example files in the current month's version and somebody brought you a version that they haven't updated in 3 months and they can't open a single file, that becomes a problem. And the killer for me is that there's no programmatic interface for me to actually go and inject my tools directly into it. That's unfortunate. I wish, I love Excel's programmability model is awesome. It's got issues, don't get me wrong, but the fact that I can actually write tools for it is pretty cool. So, you know, it is what it is, but yeah.
Okay, so we can start. I'll explain in Hebrew, and after that I will pass the microphone to you.
Sure.
אוקיי, אז ערב טוב לכולם, תודה שהצטרפתם אלינו לוובינר עם קן פולס. אנחנו בעצם, כמה מילים על קן, אנחנו בעצם עם אחד הגורואים העולמיים בתחום של Power Query. הוא כתב את הספר הזה, שאני חושב שברגע שהוא יצא, אני קניתי אותו, כן, הוא פה, הבחור הזה, ואני מאוד ממליץ על הספר הזה. הוא כתב מספר ספרים בנושאים האלה, וגם בנושא אקסל. מי שלא יודע, בעצם ה-Power Query זה כלי שקיים גם באקסל וגם ב-Power BI. זאת אומרת, מי ששולט ב-Power Query ידע בעצם לעבוד בשתי התוכנות האלה. ככה דיברנו קצת לפני, אולי שמעתם, כן ואני, על העניין של גרסאות שונות שיש באקסל, בעצם אתגרים שאנשים כמוהו שבעצם רושמים ובעצם עושים ניסויים ומפתחים כל מיני דברים, אולי גם אתם פיתחתם כל מיני דברים באקסל, אז בעצם נתקלים בהבדלי גרסאות וכאלה, שזה בעצם יוצר אחר כך כל מיני באגים שצריך לאתר וכל מיני דברים כאלה. רציתי לשתף במסך רגע את אוקיי. אני אעבור לפה, דקה. אוקיי, אז אנחנו, זה בעצם האתר של קן, יש לו בלוג מאוד 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 טוב, שנקרא The Excel Guru Blog, ויש פה מאמרים ממש אוצר ומכרה זהב למי שמתעסק עם אקסל ופאוור קוורי. אז אתם מוזמנים כמובן לבקר באתר שלו, הוא ירחיב גם כן, אני חושב, על האתר ועל האפשרויות השונות. אתם יכולים לבקר גם באתר שלי, הוא פחות בלוג, זה יותר אתר שאני בעצם נותן בעצם פה, מה אני עושה בעצם מחברת יוניק, שבבעלותי אתם יכולים להצטרף לערוץ היוטיוב שלי, Power BI ישראל, פה גם אתם תראו גם את כל הוובינרים שקיימים, שערכתי בעצם עם כל מיני גורואים עולמיים, ובאתר The Excel Studio, שזה גם אתר, זאת אומרת, הערוץ שלי בנושא אקסל, שגם לפה אני מעלה וובינרים בנושא אקסל, וגם תכנים שאני מקליט ומעלה בנושא אקסל. אבל מספיק לדבר עליי, אנחנו פה עם אחד האנשים הכי תותחים בעולם בנושא של Power Query, ואני רוצה להעביר את המיקרופון אליו. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, Ken.
Hello, it is morning over here. We're 10 o'clock in the morning. I think you guys are 8 o'clock at night, is that right?
8 o'clock, yeah.
There you go, awesome.
Okay, so I pass the microphone to you and I make you the host so you can share your screen.
Perfect, I will do that. So here we go. So you should hopefully be able to see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. This is actually the very first time that I'm actually going to be doing a presentation specifically on the software product. So I hope everybody enjoys what they're going to see here. Before we jump into actually looking at the product itself, I'm going to go through. I'll give you a very quick intro because I know that Shlomi has given me an intro, although to be honest with you, I didn't actually understand any of it because I don't speak a single word of Hebrew. So just for a quick rundown, I am an accountant. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Professional Accountants and also can have a CMA or Certified Management Accountant designation. Canada actually merged their accounting designations into one under CPA, but I've also been recognized as someone who goes and actually advances the accounting profession, which is why I've got the fellowship award as well. I have a little website at excelguru.ca. As Slommy mentioned, I have a blog there. I also have a website and a free help forum. I'm also a founding partner of a project called skillwave.training, along with Matt Allington and Miguel Escobar. I saw that Matt's actually been part of this YouTube channel before, which is kind of cool. We are actually building some really awesome self-service business intelligence training for Excel and Power BI there. We have our Power Query Academy and a bunch of other things. So it's something that's definitely worth checking out. We just actually announced a couple of new courses over the past week in dimensional modeling, and Matt's got a supercharged Power BI course that's going live as well. I've been an MVP, Microsoft MVP, since 2006 across multiple categories, Excel and data platform, which looks after Power BI, and now Office Apps and Services, which is the new category name that covers all the Office apps. So I've been connected with Microsoft for quite a long time and provided a lot of feedback over the different products and whatnot as well. And I'm also a software developer and an author. So I wear a lot of hats, do a lot of different things. Really pleased to see Shlomy's copy of M is for DataMonkey. That cover looks very well worn, so I hope that means he's got lots of use out of the book. What I'm going to show you today is actually my software product, Monkey Tools for Excel, which has some overlap to what's actually going on inside M is for DataMonkey, because there are some techniques that are in that book that I've actually tried to write some software to automate and make a little bit easier for people. Before we do that, I'm going to just round out really quickly what my modeling philosophy is. I love Power BI. I love Excel. I use both. But the way that I generally go through and build my models is I start in Excel. This is the #1 place where I'm going to go and actually build anything, especially for an analysis-focused job where I'm trying to, build up and build my budgets for next year or compare my performance between budgets and actual for different things. Once I've built my model in Excel, I will actually take that using Power Query and Power Pivot. You build it all up, you get it all ready to go, and then I'll publish it into PowerBI.com. From there, I can build reports online and then share it with my audience. So I actually get the benefits of both Excel and Power BI working together in this particular place, because what I actually have here is I have all the benefits of unstructured analysis that Excel has always been good at for years and years and years. I get the structured benefits for modeling and reporting that come from Power Query and Power Pivot, basically the same tools that are inside Power BI. I get the interactive reports from Power BI because, let's be honest, Excel's reporting engine is kind of weak, especially when you compare it to how rich Power BI's model and reporting options actually are. I get the ability to refresh my Excel models, schedule a refresh in the Power BI service if I publish them directly there. So that's kind of cool. And I get the sharing control and security that comes with Power BI that Excel has never had. So I'm trying to use the best of the features of both products together. There are some times, though, where I'll go into a very report-focused job. In those, oftentimes, I'll still take my model in Excel, but I'll import it into Power BI Desktop, and that way I get really granular control to build reports just the way I want, which I can then publish to Power BI. But 90% of the time when I'm doing a job, I don't open Power BI Desktop first. I open Excel first. I kick things off with Power Query, with Power Pivot, I build my models, and then I'm going to choose where it goes. This has been the way it's been for me for years. I honestly believe that this is the best way that it works for me, and for that reason, this is where I decided that I wanted some better tool sets in Excel in order to actually round out some of the rough edges. Because Power BI Desktop's got a lot of really cool features that have come into it, but Excel hasn't seemed to have got a ton of investment in the Excel space for our modeling careers over the past few years. So I'm trying to change some of that. This is where Monkey Tools comes in. The key thing I want you to recognize about this is my target audience is Excel users building models with Power Query and Power Pivot. I also want to look at users who get audit or get models from other people and need to audit them. Again, the big thing that I want you to recognize here is that this tool is not pitched at Power BI. If you're a person who now does 90% of their work in Power BI, then this tool is probably not for you. On the other hand, if you still do a lot of work in Excel, or suddenly you go, wait a minute, I don't have to start in Power BI, I could use Excel for what I want, then this tool really is something that you might be interested in actually looking at. So I want to make sure that we know where we're actually going with this. And there is definitely overlap between Excel and Power BI, and I have some overlap in my tool for that as well. But it's not, Power BI is not the primary focus for it. I also want to get this out of the way real quick, my pricing model. I have a forever free version. I'm a community guy, and I want to make sure that people actually have some useful tools that are actually available to them all the time. The way it starts is you go and you download a trial for the Pro license. It gives you a 2-week trial, and if you decide that you don't want to buy it, that's all cool. It'll revert to the free license. You can use that forever. No big deal. And our free license even gets updates. That's not a big issue. However, there's some better features that actually come around in the Pro license subscription. This is where we actually put our premium features that we like to use, things like colorifying and things like that, a whole bunch of model analysis that comes into our Pro subscription. The tool itself adds a new ribbon. Oh, full details you can find here at excelguru.ca/monkeytools. That will actually take you to the page that has the entire feature listing, some demos, the pricing matrix, everything is right there. Now, what the tool does is it actually adds a new ribbon to Excel. The ribbon's so big I had to split it into 2 components. Basically, we actually take this and we say, look, we got 2 different types of features that we have on this. The first one is what I call convenience features. These are basically just Excel commands that we've put into one ribbon so that you can get at them without having to flip back and forth between ribbon tabs on a regular basis. The Excel ribbon is very much divided based on here's a feature, here's another feature, here's another feature. They're not built based on workflow. I want to get in and build a model, which is going to start with data and go into data modeling and whatnot. So you end up having to flip tabs all the time. That drives me crazy. So what I've done is I've pulled these things. We've got all our Power Queries in here, and I've tried to put as much as I can of the data model stuff in this area as well. Before anybody asks, I would love to have the group right on my modeling tools for creating and managing measures. So unfortunately, there are some shortcomings in the Excel object model, and for whatever reason, well, I know the technical reason, I can't pull that group, Microsoft's group, onto my own tab, and I haven't had the time to reinvent the wheel yet on that one to build my own versions. In addition to the convenience features, this is where we come in. We've added a whole bunch of specific features for Monkey Tools, the Query Monkey, Destination Sleuth, Query Sleuth, Time Sleuth. What you'll actually see here is that we actually have 2 different types of commands generally. We've got things called monkeys. They're going to go and actually go and inject new things into your file. We also have something called sleuth. That is an English term for a detective. The idea behind the sleuth is that they help you go and actually take a look at what's going on inside your models and maybe make some changes, but really it's more about interrogating what's actually happening here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over and I'm going to show some demos. I've got probably about 45, 50 minutes here, so I'm going to try and show you as much stuff as I can. Hopefully I won't totally run out of time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Excel. I'm actually going to, this one's coming later, so I'm just going to close that one for right now, and we'll start off with a nice fresh instance of Excel. If I can just go and pull that up. And from a blank workbook, I'm going to show you some of the cool things we can do here. So, by the way, as we go through this, there is a chat window that's available in Zoom here. I would love questions from anybody. If you've got any questions about what you see or anything like that, throw them into the chat. I do need you to ask them in English because that's the only language that I know how to read, or I have some terrible French behind me as well, but it's really tough for that one as well. But if you have questions, please fire them in. So that would be a great place to get feedback and sort of tailor this to what you're actually interested in as well.
You can write it in Hebrew and I would translate it.
Okay. Perfect, that'll work too. Awesome, I can take that.
Okay, אתם יכולים לרשום בעברית ואני אתרגם את זה, אין בעיה, כן.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry.
All right, the first thing that I'm going to start with is I'm going to take a look. I'm going to generally work from left to right across the specific Monkey Tools features. If you've read M is for Data Monkey, you'll know that around, I think it's chapter 23 or so, I have a chapter in there on building parameter tables. And it takes injecting a function into your workbook and a table that is named specifically so that you can actually use those components to actually dynamically drive things in your Power Queries. The challenge that I ran into is that you always have to go back to the text file, copy the code, go into create your new query, go into the advanced editor and paste it. There's a lot of room for error. So I thought it would be way easier if I could just click a button and actually have it go and inject the new query right into the workbook as well. So at this point, the table is here. The parameter query is already injected. It's ready to go. There is a message in the cell that the workbook needs to be saved because it does need a file path in order to be able to retrieve it. But basically, it's a one-click, boom, it's done, and this is now in the workbook. So nice and easy for making new pieces if you're trying to, or linking into an existing workbook to make things dynamic. So a lot of the features that I built, just for reference here, are all about me being what's the word? I want to say lazy, but it's more like efficient, I guess, is the idea here. I'm trying to make my work easier, and my feeling is that hopefully if I make my work easier, I can make your work easier as well. Another example that I want to show you here is I have something called, I have a smart folder function. Both of these are forever free features. They always show up even on a free license. The deal with this one here with smart folder though is that we just inject a new query into your workbook and you have to read the documentation on how to hook it up. If you're in a pro mode, we can do this, where we can actually go into the smart folder query. And this also works in the 2-week trial. With the smart folder query, what's going to happen is it's going to say, okay, what would you like to call this new query? And I'll just call it files list, is fine by me. Now it's not going to work quite yet because the workbook needs to be saved. So I'm just going to go and do a file save as. If I'd already saved it beforehand, it wouldn't be a big deal. It would already have picked up something really important. But let me just go and drop this into my demos, and I'm going to call it smart folder live. We'll say save. Yep, replace it. So basically what you can see now is we've now got a workbook. It started from blank. It's got these 3 queries in it. I'm just going to go hit F2 and re-enter this one here. And you'll notice that this is actually dynamically pulling back the path to where this workbook is stored, which happens to be on my SharePoint site. What I'd like to be able to look at all of the files that are in the SharePoint site because maybe I want to combine them. So I'm going to come over and take a look at the files list query, and it comes back and tells me there's a formula firewall issue. Fantastic. Let me just double click on this. The reason being is because I have to set the privacy level on this for data privacy. So I'm going to say continue. And because my SharePoint site is set to an organizational level, I'm going to set my current workbook the same. I'm now going to say save, and you'll see that this will actually go through and it's going to enumerate all of the files that are actually in this particular folder. So we'll just wait for that to actually happen. And here we go. There's all the files that are in here. I'm going to take this query now and I'm just going to make a nice little table on my worksheet. So I'm going to reference this and I'm just going to make this one here. We're going to call it files. There we are. And I'll grab let it rename itself first. Drives me crazy that it has to do a refresh on these previews every time, but it is what it is. Actually, I'll take never mind, the date modified. We'll just go with this. Right click, remove other columns. So we'll take the name, the extension, and the folder path. I'm just creating a really simple list of what's actually in this folder right here. And I'm going to take this and load this to a worksheet. Close and load to. And I'm going to put it on a table and we'll drop it on the existing worksheet. I'll just go drop it right here. And at this point, what you'll see is it's now going to go and it's going to retrieve this list of files. I would never do this normally. What I would be doing is filtering this down and then combining files from folder and different things like that. So this is following the method that I use for that kind of work. But here's the important thing. I'm going to hit save. The challenge is on this is that when I close this, I'm now going to go and I'm going to go back to, actually, I'm going to get out of my slide deck so that I get my ribbon back here. I'm just going to wait for the file right here to finish syncing in OneDrive. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause my syncing so that it's not actually active anymore. So I'm going to come back over here. And what we'll do is we'll say, let's go right click on that one. We're going to go pause syncing, pause for 2 hours. And now OneDrive is paused. I'm now going to go and open up the Smart Folder Live, the same file that we created here. And you'll notice that it now returns my local file path. This is not my web file path anymore. The challenge with that is that the connector that's used in order to connect to files is different. In this case, we need to use files from folder, or folder.files, I believe it's actually called. In order to get it from SharePoint, we actually have to use the SharePoint.files connector. They're 2 completely different things. The SharePoint connector, you have to get to the root of the path and then drill down into it, whereas this one, you can go directly to your subfolder. And this has always been a big challenge. So here's the cool thing, is that despite the fact that this would be an issue normally, if I hit refresh all, you're going to see that this is now going to refresh for me, and it should actually come back with one more file. There it is right there. That's the temp file for Smart Folder Live. Normally, I would go and actually pull this or filter out files that start with the tilde icon because those ones are my temp files. But the key thing to recognize here is that this is a real big challenge, being able to dynamically work between these 2 different data sources. And I've got it working, and it is observing the correct privacy levels, switching back and forth between the 2 without giving me formula firewall errors. This can be published to Power BI, and schedule for a refresh. Unfortunately, because there is a local folder involved, it does need a data gateway for that. But it can actually work around some of the issues that we actually run into in this case. So that's one of the features that I'll use for making sure that my demos, every time I open them up, are actually dynamically getting the correct file path when I'm playing around with these. Now, so that's the first one that I want to show you. I want to show you a couple other things in this particular area as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up one of my files here, this one here, Query Monkey base model. And I'm just going to show you really quickly on this what we actually have here. I have a very simple data model inside this file. So if I go and take a look at the Power BI data, or the Power Pivot data model behind this, you'll notice in this case here that I have a categories table. It's linked based on the category field to sales and linked on the category field based on budget. But I'm missing a couple of important components to what I'm actually dealing with if I want to build a pivot table to be able to slice by date. I have no calendar table. Now, the challenge is that my data is based on this. So there is no calendar table. What I've seen a lot of people do in Excel is build a table manually of calendars. That's all good, but it doesn't update with your data. And this is where Power Query can become super, super helpful. So what I'm going to do is go to Query Monkey. I'm going to choose to create a dynamic calendar. In this case, I'm going to flip this to say I want my earliest date ever is going to be based on sales. But my latest date, I want to go to the end of the year for my budget. I have the ability to build a 12-month calendar, 445, 44544, a few different varieties of different things. I'm just going to go with the standard 12-month for right now. And what I'm going to do is click Create. At this point, you'll notice that there's 3 new queries have been created on the right-hand side already. Start date and end date are the beginning and the end date of my calendar. And then the calendar query is a nice query that has every single date in between. So it's created those, and I've now got a nice little calendar with a single column of data. Of course, I want a little bit more than that, and this is something I'm actually looking at adding into this particular feature later on. So I'm going to tell you some of the stuff that I'm building too. I'm trying to look to add some options to it automatically to allow you to say, hey, you know what, can you also just check a box to include, say, year? And can we also check a box to include something like month? When it comes to things like month name, in this case here, I'm going to go with name of month. I'm not a big fan of full month names. I prefer to have things like short month names, where I'm going to extract the first 3 characters here. So I want to provide the option for that. Would you like full or short or both? And at this point, the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and change this. I want my years to be text. I can now come back and say close and load. This will reload my calendar with all of my fields into the particular data model and get it ready to go. So I'll just wait for that to happen. So I created the base for you. You get to add your own columns right now. But the important thing around this that I want you to recognize, and this is a feature I just added last week, is that it's actually created the relationship. Now, it's only created one on this one. I must have a bug that's going on here, but the intent is that it actually creates the relationships for both of these. And when I ran this yesterday, it did. So I'm going to have to check out what's going on that one. We're constantly working on fixing little bugs that we find and all that kind of stuff. So at this point, it should automatically relate these 2 things for you. I wish I could do this, hide the foreign keys from the tables. Unfortunately, I can't. Microsoft doesn't give me the ability to do it, but I'm also going to do these ones while I'm in here because that's the best practice that you should do, is hide all of the things on your fact tables anyway. Now, the model's created, but I'm missing something else. I'm missing measures. Personally, I normally add measures to my fact table, sales, and budgets, but I know a lot of people that are really big on having a measure table. So here we go. I'm going to create a new measure table. The default name is underscore measures. You cannot create a table called just plain old measures in Excel. So when we say okay, boom, it's added it. It's now loaded to the data model. And we tell you, hey, look, to make this function correctly, you need to go and hide the one column that's in here. Otherwise, you're going to run into some challenges later on with things. So I'll jump back over here, right click, and hide from client tools. I've now got a beautiful little measures table. It's completely disconnected. That's fine. So now if I jump to Power Pivot, I wish I could get these buttons on my own stuff, but here we go. I'm going to go and create right on my measures table. I'm going to create one for sales dollars, This is going to be a simple sum of the sales amounts. I'll make this a number. Let's create another one. I'm going to create 3 measures really fast here. This one's going to be budget dollars. This one is going to be the sum of budgets amounts. This is also something that I'd like to actually do, is create something akin to the Power BI quick measures, so that this actually becomes a lot easier to do, especially for one of the key ones that I think that Power BI actually missed is they give you the ability in your quick measures to create more complicated measures, but nobody gave you the ability to create a very easy measure in place of an implicit measure, and that's one of the things that I want to actually solve here as well. Mm-hmm. These have now been added. Cool. I can go over and say insert pivot table. I'll create this one here, and now I can go and say, let's go and drop my sales and my budget, my variance, and from my categories, I could put my category on rows and my class underneath that. Oop, got that one backwards, class goes above, there we go. And then I could go and take something like, hey, let's put the calendar year, and maybe even move the values down below if I want to do that, however I want to play with it. But the key thing is here is that we've actually gone through and actually built up all of the data a little more rapidly than what we could in the past. And as I say, I got to look at my bug that's going on with my calendar table and why it didn't relate completely across this. But the idea is that we can get it nice and quick to actually build a lot of stuff and speed up some of the process and advise you on where some best practices should be followed along the way. All right, Ken, if there's any questions on this, please, fire away with it. So that's the first one.
Okay. There's no question for now, but I have to say the calendar feature is awesome because
cool.
yeah, because in Excel, not like in Power BI, that there is a auto calendar or something like that. On the DAX, there's no way to make a dynamically calendar table.
Yeah,
so.
No, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, I'll show you something else with this too, is that even if we've done this kind of stuff, and this is what gets kind of interesting, is that on occasion, I also want to report based on 2 different calendars. When I was working at a golf course years ago, we had a December 31st year end, but our payroll was biweekly. So we actually wanted a 445 to be able to report sales against payroll. So in this case here, I can go and actually create a secondary calendar just like this. Now, the 445 requires a different variable to start for start date 364 and end date 364. I never picked a custom year end. I could have done this, but this will automatically back it up and roll it forward to get this correct. And what it's going to do right now is it should go and load my 445 calendar in as well. And if everything worked correctly, I hid some columns on this, so it's actually told me it couldn't create the relationships. I can't talk to hidden columns, but at the end of the day, we now have right in here a 445 calendar as well. So I can actually take this and say, you know what, I want to relate this one to sales date as well, and this one as well. And boom, now I can start reporting on my 445 instead based on fiscal periods. Wow. Because the challenge, or because fiscal periods are a challenge for a lot of people to work out, that one we do. And this helps drive Rob Colley's greatest formula in the world for working with periodicity. Those fields are already there. Again, one of the things that I'd like to do in future, I'd love to do a lot of work around calendars, is I'd like to actually add the ability for these non-standard fiscal year ends to pull fiscal periods and things like that as well. It's just an algorithm. I got to figure out how to actually plumb it into my software. I mean, I already have it written up in books. It's just a matter of programming it. So it's kind of nice. And again, the abilities now that you can start playing around with this and saying, hey, you know what? Instead of actually looking at this with a year basis here, and let me just go and actually let me pull some of this down. I'm just going to switch this back to just look at categories here. I could now go and say, show it to me by, for example, year ID, and it will actually break a couple of these across. So it's got some interesting components that we can actually play around with, which is kind of nice. All right, next one I want to show you is I'm going to pull up a file here called Destination Sleuth. Shlomi, the blog post that you actually showed a little bit earlier was actually announcing some of the stuff that we did in this particular area. One of the challenges here I've got a whole bunch of different calendar tables, but each one of them has been loaded by connection only. And the reason why that would have happened is because when I came in and started building some of my queries here, I was building multiple queries all in one session of Power Query. And unlike Power BI, you can't say, hey, I want that one to load to the data model. I don't want that one to load. You get one shot and that's it. Everything goes into the same place. Well, if I've built all of these staging queries that are intended to load to connection only, and I've built all these guys which are intended to load to the data model, do I load everything to the data model and then start pulling other ones out one by one? Or do I load everything to connection only? I always go connection only because it's faster. But then you'd have to do this. You'd have to go right click, load to, and you have to change the load destination of each one of these things individually. And that takes time. So we built this little form called Destination Sleuth, which actually shows you not only that it's been loaded, 4 rows loaded, but this one shows you that it's been loaded to data model. So I could come back and say, hey, you know what, start 364. I don't want this loaded to the data model. I'd rather have it loaded to connection only. So I'm going to change the load destination. And it tells me that, hey, you know what, we're going to make some changes to this. No problem. It's now a connection only query. It's been changed. If I want to send it to a worksheet, I could easily do that. Go to a table on a new worksheet. And if I want, one of the other things that doesn't happen with Excel, it just creates a new worksheet with a name sheet 1. Well, I'm going to name the sheet after the query. So now when I create it, it loads to the worksheet with the actual table name on it as well. This is something somebody asked for in one of our forums. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, you know what, maybe I want this connection only. I'm also going to delete the host worksheet though. So if I go back to connection only and update the load destination, it should delete this worksheet and not leave it around as litter. And, oh, I got to select it first. That's kind of important. There we go. And there it goes. So that's kind of cool. But the really cool piece is that if I want all of these calendars in the data model, I'm now going to go to the data model and update the load destinations. And what's going to happen is that each one of these will now be recreated to load to the data model, which is kind of cool. So you can see that they're spinning down here. The 13x4 calendar is already in there, and it's going to start moving through the other ones one at a time as well, loading each of the data model. Some little pieces that drive me crazy about this, just from a technical standpoint. In order to do this, we do actually have to delete and recreate the query. In my experience and rigorous testing, even if there's a query that relates on it, that actually doesn't blow it up, which is really important from my side. I wanted to make sure of that. But the little niggly bits that drive me crazy, I can't put these back in the right folders. I wish I could, but we have no ability to talk to that programmatically. There's a lot of things I need to get on user voice. At any rate, the table refreshes. Now everything's been loaded to the data model, but I get to do it all at once rather than going through one at a time to actually change the load destination. So just a little bit of things to help speed it up. In addition, you can also see very quickly where things are actually loaded based on color rather than just the X rows loaded. So that's our destination sleuth that helps us figure out what's going on there and play around with things. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to close this one down. I'll show you another cool little feature here. This one here is the time sleuth. Now, this particular file holds some information in it around, it's actually a test file that I used to try and test the performance of a function that has been included in M is for DataMonkey, which we have discovered you should never ever use. And that is my PQV lookup custom function. It makes a great demo, but as it turns out, there's a much faster way to do this. And we found this out after we wrote the book, and this was something that I went back and used to try and test it to see what's going on. So, excuse me, a couple of things I want to look at here. The first one, let's just pull up the destination sleuth. You see this gets pretty colorful in this case because we have a few queries that are loaded to connection only, 3 that are loaded to worksheets, 1 loaded to the data model, and 1 that's loaded to the data model and the worksheet as well. So it's a hybrid connection here. I'm not going to change any of this. I just want to show you what that actually looks like once you actually see it in full blown with a whole bunch of these guys around. I'm now going to open up something else, a new feature here called Query Sleuth. And what Query Sleuth is this is our feature that allows you to go and take a look at your M code. And the most important thing I want you to recognize about this is that you can still interact with Excel as you play with this, unlike when you're working with the Power Query editor. I'm going to show you a query called buffered. You'll notice that we indent your M code, although if you want, you can turn that off and look at it this way. You can also turn off the color highlighting, although I don't know why you would want to, because that just looks like standard Power Query. Personally, I prefer to see all of my stuff looking like this. Once you get used to looking at your M code in a nice indented format, it makes it really, really easy to work with, in my opinion. This is a buffered query. This one is an unbuffered query. This is the exact same query. The only difference is right here around lookup table. We can see here's the buffered version, has a table.buffer in it. What these do, if I just double click on this, you can now see the dependency tree of these queries. It is pulling data from a Excel workbook table called data. That's the blue one over here. It is comparing it against lookup table, which is the orange table over here, to form either an exact match or an approximate match like you would get from VLOOKUP for Excel. And it is using the PQVLOOKUP function, which is here, which is quite long and, as it turns out, very inefficient. The only difference, as I say, between buffered and unbuffered is the table.buffer wrapped around the lookup table. So what I'd like to do with this is I'd like to go back and say, okay, let's go and try and see what the performance actually looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some trials against this. And I want to create a chart of the variation. I'm only going to do 3 trials. That's the minimum I need. But I'm going to double them to compare the privacy effect to see whether turning privacy on or off has any effect on this. I'm going to go with buffered and unbuffered, and I'm going to refresh the selected queries. Now, at this time, what's going to happen is Monkey Tools will go through and it's going to kick off a refresh of the individually selected query. And it's going to first refresh the buffered and then the unbuffered query. It's going to do this 3 times, and we're going to go and actually check it with privacy on or off. So there's a few different pieces going on here. This is going to take about probably 1 or 2 minutes, I think, by the time it's all done. The other thing you should be really, really aware of if you're going to be playing around with this kind of stuff is that the other resources that are running on your system have an impact on the performance on Power Query. The fact that I'm running this over a Zoom meeting is definitely affecting the performance times that we're actually seeing here. And that's because Power Query has a single threaded processing engine to it. And if any of the other system processes go and actually try and take some of that thread space, Power Query can't actually use it. So to get proper, really true benchmark tests, you want to shut down basically everything you got to go through and run it so that you can actually go and see what's actually happening here. This is a very rudimentary timer. We are actually looking forward to seeing when Excel gets the new ability that's coming from Power BI. There is a performance tool that actually is in there for timing performance of queries. It will be coming to Excel. And once we can get that and turn it on by code, we'll be able to get more granular with this by actually looking at, say, steps and trying to figure out what steps the most impactful. As it is right now, the main thrust behind this one is if you've got a lot of queries in your workbook, providing that they load to a destination, whether it's workbook or data model or both, we can actually then test the performance and see what the refresh is. In Excel 365, you should know that doing a standard refresh all operation will always be faster than running this detailed section here because it actually is able to take advantage of child node caching. In ours, it doesn't. We're just looking at the specific individual performance of each one of these. And we can do a detailed refresh of every query. We can do just the selected ones, or we can run your standard refresh all as well. What I'm tracking, the time in order to refresh this query under this particular state, as well as the time to run the next one. We also run a cumulative time total as well over the entire thing. Once it's done, it's going to create me a nice little chart so that I can actually go back and compare the effects of these things as well, although there's one small tweak that I have to make on this one too. And one of the bugs I'm trying to work out is I'm trying to get this little scroll bar here to scroll down as we go, which turned out to be harder than I thought. All right, and here we go. Another one of those small little issues that I have to fix on my chart design. In our documentation, it tells you have to add your legend yourself because this is what we call an IV chart, and Microsoft did not give us the ability to turn on the chart legend. There's no code object for that, which is a little bit frustrating. But the key part I want to recognize here, if you'll notice what's happened is we've created a box and whisker chart. The X in the middle is the mean average time, and then we actually end up working through quartiles and whatnot. In the documentation, we explain a little bit more about how all this works. what I want you to recognize is that the buffered query is always faster than the unbuffered query, and the amount of variation, the height of the boxes, is always bigger in the unbuffered as well. What does that mean? Turning privacy off delivers more consistent and faster results generally for your queries. And if I now go back and say, okay, well, that's kind of interesting, I'm going to go and take a look at just the buffering. So, sorry, turning privacy off will always end up yielding faster and more consistent results. Buffering your queries in this case actually makes this a lot faster. So if I go and look at the buffering here, you can see that in the privacy off, it takes about a maximum of 4 seconds, from 1 to 4 seconds on average. With privacy on, we're somewhere around 1.5 up to 8 seconds. So it's a fairly significant difference overall. Here's a couple of charts that I wrote or that I ran earlier. I always like to run this over multiple trials. This one is 5. And the important thing I want you to recognize about this one is that this is the PQV lookup buffered. The other one, I'm going to get rid of the unbuffered because that one's just slow. This one here is what we actually do by actually building a PQV lookup through our regular data pattern. It's all driven by the user interface. You'll notice that even with the buffered or with the privacy off, the UI-driven one performs better, but it actually even performs better than a buffered version of PQV lookup, which is kind of interesting. And this is kind of why we built this tool, was to play around and actually test scenarios. So there's one chart that I did back in on February 18th. Here's another one as well. This is one that's actually loading to both the worksheet and the data model with privacy on. That has a massive effect. I mean, there's even an outlier way up here, 70 seconds. So some crazy kind of stuff here. So as I say, it's a rudimentary timer, but it's helped me identify in some of my cases where I've had some real issues and breakdowns in some of my models. Now, I'm going to close this one down, and I'm going to jump into another feature here. This one is going to be, let's go into Pivot Sleuth Complex. We'll just jump ahead a little bit so we've got some time to look at everything. One of the big challenges that we run into when we run into building models in Excel, people hate this message. Relationships between tables may be needed. Why? For this reason, we built Pivot Sleuth. And what Pivot Sleuth does is it opens up a nice little dialog box to go and give you some feedback about what's actually going on your pivot tables and what's potentially causing the conflicts here. This red one here is obviously pretty serious. And when you go and mouse over it, it'll tell you it's a disconnected table. And unfortunately, the message will go away after a short amount of time. But if you click it, we actually bring this up. So this is a disconnected table. You should not use fields and dimensional areas for this because they're always going to cause this particular message to come up. If we go and take a look at the chit details for sales, we can actually see that it can't be filtered by business line. So I'm going to go back with that one and say, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. That's probably something I should take care of. In addition, we can also see that we've got some blue fields here. Now, this one's telling us some information. It tells me that chit item ID is a foreign key. That means I've used the field also from a fact table from the many side of the relationship. This is not what we want to do. We always want to use the field from the one side of the relationship. We've got the same issues over here with chit headers hour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, all right, well, instead of using hour, where we've pulled it from, which is coming from, let me see, which table are we actually looking at? I'm just going to collapse this one down here. Where is my hour? I think it's coming from chit headers. It's supposed to be coming from the shifts table. This is the one side of the relationship. I know this because I know the model. So I'm going to just move this one on. And then for my chit details table, I'm using item ID. I want to get rid of this one. And I'm going to go to the items table and bring my item ID back on here as well. So I believe I had it here. And at this point, if I go back into Pivot Sleuth, you'll notice that these two blue messages have gone away. It's happy with where those ones are, but we're still not happy about the business lines. So let's go back for a second. We'll say, you know what, we shouldn't be using a disconnected table. We'll get rid of that. And now we'll go back and look at Pivot Sleuth again. Everything looks nice and white and clean. Okay, cool. But now we're going to actually go and app this up because they're going to cause another problem. I'm going to go to budgets. And I'm going to add my budget to my table. And I get a relationship between tables may be needed error again. And we can also see some grand totals all over the place. So obviously there's something that's gone a little bit sideways here. But if I go back into the pivot sleuth one more time, you'll notice now that even though everything was configured correctly before, we've now got a whole bunch of red going on. And we've highlighted it. The issues that these red problems are related to happen to have something to do with the budgets field, which is why it's in yellow. This particular field cannot be filtered by the item ID or the hour or the chit ID, which is actually showing up here. The chit ID, by the way, if I select this, will select the slicer that it's being used on. This really shouldn't be here, so I'm just going to actually delete it. So I'll close my pivot sleuth here for a second. I'm going to delete this guy, make him go away, and we'll come back and look at pivot sleuth again. That's one field down. The challenge with this one, why is it coming up? Let's go look at the data model and I'll show you. So if I jump into the data model and I look at my relationship views, the fields that I've actually used, I'm trying to cross-filter budget over here, and the fields that I've used are, we've used item ID from this table. Notice that there's a one-to-many relationship, so this cannot cross-filter this path, which means that this is actually a poor choice to be on the pivot table for that reason. In addition, I'm trying to sort or filter by hour, and you'll notice that it's a one-to-many relationship here and goes down this way, but we've got a many-to-one this way, so we can't filter up through this path or through this path. So this one cannot cross-filter budget. So we actually worked that out to say, hey, there's something gone wrong here. Now, it is possible that the key thing that I want you to recognize is that what I'm doing is I'm actually going into this and I'm evaluating natural relationship paths for active relationships. It is entirely possible that you could actually use some virtual relationships. You could write a measure that does a use relationship or cross-filter or treat as. I don't look at those yet, but they would still cause this particular issue. In order to get rid of that, what we can do is we can hop into the data or into the data model here, and we can say, look, let's go to diagram view, and let's hide all of the unaggregated fields on our fact tables. So we'll turn them into measure tables as well, so that they only have facts on, or only have measures on them. When that happens, what Microsoft's background is on this one is they say, oh, well, if you've turned this into an official measure table, we want you to be able to use them anywhere because we assume you know what the DAX is that you're writing, and therefore we're going to ignore all these relationship issues. It also gives these guys a nice little Sigma icon up the top here that flags them as measure tables. So all your measure tables show at the top in alphabetical order, and then all of your dimensions show down here. Pivot Sleuth also recognizes this and says, hey, it looks like everything's working correctly. Now you could argue, yeah, but these things are still showing grand totals. Sure. If you want to see what potential conflicts are there, all you need to do is go back in here again and say, you know what, on that budget table, let me just unhide one of the columns. It doesn't even matter which one. By unhiding a single column, it's no longer flagged as a measure table. We can see it will come back and it's going to actually treat it like a dimension. Boom, the relationships message comes up. And now we can see which potential conflicts are actually working our way through this kind of stuff. So this is a tool that, that helps people sort of understand what's going on in their pivot table, why they're getting this, and the individual things that they need to do in order to close or clear those off. This is also one of the big pieces that we see when people insert measure tables, is that they leave one unaggregated column. That's why my tool says, hey, go back in here, right click, hide from client tools, and that way you won't have that particular measure table with an unaggregated column. It'll flag it as a fact table and make that error message go away. So that's the Pivot Sleuth. I've got more demos on that, but I'm a little bit out of time on this one. I want to show you a couple other things. So like, for example, DAX Sleuth. The DAX Sleuth is my dependency tracer for DAX measures. So if we take a look at something like percent of sales group, you'll see that we automatically indent your DAX for you. If you double click on it, we can tell you which measures are actually being used by it. So you see we have sales dollars here. Sales dollars is a precedent measure of the particular measure here. So this is what it actually looks like. So we can actually trace these through very easily. When you look at this, any green column is a measure that has child measures to it. Any blue columns are calculated columns. A yellow column is an explicit measure, and this orange column is an implicit measure where we just drag the field onto the pivot table. I don't use these. they do show up in my list whether or not they have been hidden in the back end, which is the default state for Excel. So if you drag a column on and then remove it, it doesn't go away. It stays in the DAX definitions unless you go and actually show it and explicitly delete it. So it's just something to be aware of there. Now I want to show you this one, burgers sold all time. Notice that it's got a chain of 3 different items. We've got a small calculate, we got burgers sold underneath, and then we got sales units. I'm going to come back to burgers sold all time, and I want to show you that number 1, if you double click, it'll expand the entire dependency tree for you. If I go back to something like, well, actually, let me do this. Let me flatten this measure. What flatten does is it actually says, get me the next level down, burgers sold, and replace it. Notice I've still got sales units here, so I'm going to flatten this one more time. This is the complete measure. We wrap in nested calculates to make sure that it actually calculates properly. If I wanted to use that, I could click update. This will write it back into the Power Pivot model, and that's what the new measure will be. I want to show you this guy here. I'm going to go to draft sold, take a look at that. I'll come back to burgers sold. Because I didn't update, it tosses those changes, which is what it should do. I'd also like to take this one. I'm going, you know, draft beer, I need another measure on this one that's based on this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one here. And I'm going to go and call this one canned beer. I'm going to say, okay. It's now going to go and actually write this into the data model. It takes everything for the measure, including the formula and the formatting controls for it, and creates me a new measure right here called canned beer. And all I need to do to this one now is come back into my editor here and say, hey, this one was supposed to be canned beer, update, and now it'll write that in. So this just makes it a little bit easier to actually duplicate measures along the way should you need to build additional ones. If I go and close this now, go back to Excel, it'll actually be ready to go, and we'll be able to actually go and add. You can see my canned beer measure right here. We have some different options, grouping your measures by table or by measures. So if you want to see them this way, we don't actually need a measure table if you want to actually look at it in that format. You know, doing things like changing colors and stuff like that. But the other thing I want to show you that's really important around this one is this. If I go and look at sales, on the right-hand side, you'll notice that we actually have a Navigator window as well. I'm going to shrink this down because I really want you to see what actually ends up happening with this. If I go and select Pivot Table 1, it will take me to Pivot Table 1. Pivot Table 2, Pivot Table 5. It'll even go and select me the chart for the pivot chart that's actually on this worksheet. So I can navigate through to see where these measures are actually used, which is kind of cool. We also pick up named ranges, which we can't select, but we do also pick up OLAP formulas, which we can. So that's another piece that we can actually play around with as well. I'm going to move across to Model Sleuth. This is where we actually start getting into reports. I'm going to run you a nice model summary on this report. This one comes back and tells me I have 9 tables. I've got 9 model relationships in this particular model. Let's just go and actually check that. I won't count them all, but you get the idea. 9 tables, 9 relationships. There they all are. So I'm just going to close that one down. I got 20 measures altogether, a bunch of queries. This is how much model memory is being used. It tells me what the data sources for these are. So has somebody created a new or a connection to the data model by going into manage model and gone into from database in this area, which we don't want to encourage anymore. I want to drive everything through Power Query, so I can see that there. It tells me all of my relationships, my summary stats for the tables, how many rows are there? Are they disconnected? Are they snowflaked? How many columns do we have? What's the data source? I've got column stats with how many unique values are there, what the data type is, are they hidden or not, if there's a formula that's being used. We can see all of our measure stats. Are the measures actually being used? So I could filter and say, hey, that canned beer measure, you created, but you never used it anywhere. Why don't you get rid of it? All the formulas are there. And then this one here is where all the queries come from. And this is actually kind of interesting. I got asked for this, so we added it. This is actually a table, even though it doesn't look like it. So if I go and turn on the filter button and say, show me the precedents, the only thing that I don't want to see blanks and I don't want to see queries, this tells me all of the data sources that are actually being used to feed this particular guy. And I can see there's some stuff that I want to play with here, but the key thing is this will help you actually audit where your actual data comes from. I want to show you this on a bigger model as well. So I'm going to go and pick up this one here. This is actually based on a project that I did for a client. It's probably the highest earning consulting project that I've ever done. This is a massive data model that was built to forecast things for housing development. It actually has a huge amount of stuff going on. And if I go and take a look at the model data map here, This is something that once upon a time I built by hand in Visio to try and trace the query flow that was actually going through this particular model in order to land it into these particular individual tables. This is actually one of the driving pieces of why I built Query Sleuth. And inside here, you'll be able to see just how many queries are actually running on this particular workbook. I'm going to go and maximize this window right now, and I'll show you forecast. This shows me all of the precedent queries that are being used to drive the forecast table, some of which are short, some of which get quite long. You can see these are quite long queries here. So this allowed me to actually deal with it when my client came back and said, yeah, I want to change something. And I went, holy smokes, what is that going to affect? I could very quickly switch this into dependency view and say, if I change this one, where's it going to go? I've got to watch out for all these things here. So I've got the ability to switch back and forth in these guys. So it's kind of nice. I've also got my, my DAX sleuth that I can work with on this case here to go and take a look at some of the measures. The one that I want to show you right now is if I go and take a look at amount, you can see that the amount measure gets reused in an awful lot of places over here. Here's one of the OLAP formulas that it's actually used in. So I can jump back and forth between these. Here's the charts that it's used in as well, and different pivot tables. So I can navigate through the workbook to see it. If I run my model summary, you can see that this actually gets into it's going to be a long page when this actually comes out because there's a lot of stuff that's going on. There's a lot of queries that are feeding this, a lot of different pieces. There's actually 46 queries inside this workbook. I've got a linked table that's feeding into things as well. And you can see that it's actually pulled up all the information that I'm looking for here with my queries, with my measures and relationships. The reason why I started looking at this kind of stuff is because I wanted to know if I could make my model more efficient. One of the biggest places to do that is by actually taking control of your columns and looking at the memory that's actually used. Can you recover any of the memory for columns that aren't being used? So in this case, if I look in forecast, I have a column called sector notes that is never being used. I could save myself 19 kilobytes of memory on this particular case. Not a lot, but it's some. And this is the idea, is you can go through and look at these things and say, well, why did I add month short and date key month and date year and date key quarter if I'm never going to use these on any pivot tables? So this is identifying that right away. And if you're feeling incredibly geeky for it, here's the number of unique values, which help drive compression. I'll also tell you whether it's hash or value encoded memory, which probably nobody cares about but a geek like me, but it's there anyway. I can run you an unused items report as well. We have an unused columns one too, but the unused items will come back and give me a complete listing of everything. Column names, whether they're calculated or whether they're natural, whether they're measures, explicit or implicit, whether they're queries. This tells me everything that can be removed from this particular workbook without impacting the end result, which is pretty darn awesome. Something I'm pretty proud of being able to build here. Now, the last thing that I want to show you, I'm going to run this, this demo out here, is I want to show you that there is some integration between this and Power BI. The model that I'm in right now is called Model Sleuth-EA. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to connect to a Power BI desktop file. And the one that I'm going to pick up is, if I go into my Monkey Tools demos, I'm going to grab this one, LP Azure-SQL. This is now going to load and kick off Power BI. Now, unfortunately, we can only connect to a single running instance of Power BI. We got to shut down the other ones in order to make this one work. The other thing that I am wishing I didn't have to do here is I wish I didn't have to push up this Power BI logo right in the front, but I do need to load Power BI. The reason why is that that message gets in front of the message that I'm waiting for from Excel that says, hey, the data model's been loaded. When I click OK, Power BI is still loading in the background. We actually connect to it very quickly. But what I can now do is I can say, show me the query sleuth. This is the LP Azure SQL model. We're not looking at the same one anymore. And I can now see that, hey, calendar for this one is driven through my end date Azure database. This is the calendar pattern that I injected automatically for my Excel worksheets earlier. I can see my DAX sleuth, so I can actually see exactly what's going on inside of these guys as well. Now, you'll notice that we don't actually track where things are being used. That's not something that we've actually gone through and done yet. However, when we look at this stuff, we are doing our indenting and color highlighting. You can still see your chains on this one here. You can still flatten it, but unlike Excel, you can't duplicate or push back to the model. That's something we'd like to do at some point in the future. We can still run our model summary reports though. If I run a model summary, this is now going to go and replace the old one that I have there with the one from the LP Azure SQL. I would generally do this from a blank workbook, obviously, but at this point, this is the data report for the Power BI model. I can still see I've got snowflake tables and disconnected tables, exactly how much memory is being used. I've actually hit some of my clients' Power BI models with this, and in one, I found a date table. This is the default built-in date table from Power BI. He had 16 of them in there and was actually consuming about 30% of his model memory was on hashing out these date tables. It was really bad news. So we ended up going back and actually building specific calendar tables for it, which made his model way more efficient. So there's a lot of different things that we can actually do in this area. And you can see where these things actually start showing up with their calculated columns and whatnot. There's the measures that I'm using in this case, and the queries. Again, we can filter down for the different data sources as well. We can get the memory usage out of a Power BI model. We'll just replace this one as well. So you'll see, there we go. That's from the Power BI model for LP Azure. The things I can't do, I can't give you an unused column or unused items report yet. We just haven't actually done the work of scanning through all the items inside to figure out what visuals things are being used on. One day that's going to happen, but just not yet. But one thing that is kind of cool, this actually works for both Excel and Power BI models. I just happen to be connected to Power BI right now. If you like to be able to interrogate the model yourself and you know anything about DMVs, we can actually go through and do stuff like this where I say, hey, you know what? I want to see the DMV right from the system. Let's create one right here. This is giving me all of the individual measures that are in this particular Power BI model. In addition, this is completely able to do something like this where we say, hey, you know what, I want to see this where name equals, let's go with sales dollars. So I can actually go and create the DMV and it will actually pull that information out. So if you want to interrogate DMVs as well, this has always been kind of challenging. You got to go and read Chris Webb's blog on how to set these things up and then do a little bit of programming and whatnot. I gave you a tool to just be able to go in and actually run your DMV queries right away. Originally, when I first released this tool, I actually removed that, and I got some feedback from people that they actually really liked it and wanted to have it back, so we brought it back. Finally, just a quick documentation thing as well. If I'd like to export the model components, I can do things like this. I can actually go and export my queries to a worksheet and new worksheet. Export, all done, cool. What I should be able to see now, oh, actually, it doesn't look like it did it for my Power BI model. That's weird. For my Excel models, if I go and connect to that, let me try that. Excel active workbook. There we go. We're rebound to the model for our model Sleuth. If I now take this, export model components, I'm going to go to queries in a worksheet and new workbook, export, and what will happen is it's now actually going to create me a new file. I'm going to have to look at that for the Power BI model. I'm not sure why that didn't work. I'll have to check it. But basically what it's done now is it's created me a nice workbook that actually has every single query loaded to a different worksheet. A client of me asked for this because they actually like to be able to difference two files to see what's been going on. So a little bit of audit work that goes on behind the scenes. And based on that, I think I've taken about an hour to give you a pretty good run-through crash course of a whole bunch of stuff that we do. It's not everything, but it is quite a bit of what's actually going on inside Monkey Tools. Let's close this one down here. I just want to let you know with this guy here that if you're looking for more information on what's actually happening there, the best place probably to find out what I'm doing is to actually follow my blog. That's where I talk about the new features we released. The actual page for Monkey Tools itself, if you go to xlguru.ca or Excel Guru in full.slash Monkey Tools, that is the page that has the ability to get your free trial or purchase it or see the documentation and what features are there. And you can also follow me at any of these social media platforms as well. So I still don't see any questions in there. So, I mean, I think people are in shock from the awesome your awesome tool. I am. I mean, I hope it's useful to people. I mean, obviously, it's got to be targeted to the right person. As I say, like for Excel modelers, I think it's really useful. I use it virtually every time I'm actually working with things, and I will say from my perspective, the reason I've been building this thing honestly for about 10 years. I showed it to a buddy of mine about a year and a half ago when I was in New Zealand, and he said, "Why is this not available for sale?" I've been working on this thing, trying to get it, and I'm in that dreaded area where we sit there and say, well, it's never good enough. We always want to add more. And that's one of the philosophies that we're going through with Monkey Tools is we said, okay, well, I guess there is a lot there. Let's put it out there. But we are releasing new updates as we build them. We're releasing bug fixes constantly on this thing and whatnot. The way that I'm building the tool is I am listening to feedback from other people, but I'm also trying to nail down all the things that drive me crazy when I'm building a model. And I hope that comes through in what's there, is that these are built by an end user because I'm trying to solve problems that affect us. And that's where I'm hoping that people get some use out of it. I have a laundry list of about, I want to say about 100 new features that I want to add to this that are all on our backlog for different things. There's a ton coming. We're not just looking at improving what we have. We're looking at adding entirely new things like quick measure things, maybe libraries to store your most favorite pieces and queries and things, all kinds of stuff. So there'll be a lot more coming over the next few years as well as we go through. So there you go.
Okay, it's an awesome tool. It's I think the word is time, to saving time, because the time is limited, and we are wasting a lot of time for doing some things you show us in one click or two, and okay.
And I mean that's the goal, right? Is it's all about trying to make it easier to build better models faster and give back some feedback about how can we improve these things, and that's what our focus is definitely going to be on as we try and work through this stuff and watch where the Excel team is doing their work. So I will say that particularly for all of you that are joining from Israel, as I say, we've never looked at or built anything that actually works in an interface that works from a right to left. I mean, North America is very much a left to right sort of organization that we've got going on with things. So our official line on this one is that we do support English installs of Excel, but I would be curious to know how it works. I don't know whether or not I can support it because I can't read Hebrew and we don't have an option to replicate it, but I am curious to know if it works or not for people. So if you do find things that aren't working, shoot us a note. If we can fix it, we will. But outside of that, I mean, knowing what's there, it's very much a curiosity to us for sure. So
okay, so you have a green light to reach directly to Ken. He's a very busy man, so take it in both hands.
I would say this: run the trial before you buy it. Make sure it works in your instance before you work with it, right? So the only thing that you'll find that doesn't completely work in the pro trial is we don't let you run a full model summary report. That's those particular reports, we actually suppress half the information because we believe that that's very valuable. But all of the indentations and colorifications and all the query injecting, all those things work in the pro trial as well. So try before you buy. If it doesn't work on your instance of Excel, then let us know and don't buy. We get that. That makes sense. I don't want to have unhappy customers around this. But if it does work and you find value in it, we'd love to have you as a customer. And that's basically the way it goes. My job is about making sure that it adds value to you. So there you go.
Great. I want to ask you about the dates. In Israel, we write a date like in Europe. The month, year, not in the United States, month, day, and year.
Yeah. So the way that Power Query works for this stuff is that I don't actually do any localization with the date itself. I just create it as a date. The localization is completely freeform. So when I'm working with my calendars, what I've done is I've actually pointed to a column that is already formatted as a date. And it needs to already be formatted as a date. So you've already done that work about making sure that it's correct, right? So if you're pulling from a text file and it's coming in backwards, you need to you need to set your data type with locale in order to get it and say, look, it's an English US locale. That will convert it into a proper date that then renders in your format of day, month, year, which is correct. At that point, when you use my calendar generator, you point it at that column and it says, oh, this is a date? Cool. It actually behind the scenes factors based on the date serial number, not the actual date format that's visible. So it should get it right every time.
Great to hear.
Because yeah, that's a big issue. We're day, month, year as well, the US or month, day, year, but I'm in a worse state than you guys are because only like a third of Canadians actually know what our official date format is. So okay. You'll see two different people in the same organization thinking it's this different date standard. Oh, it's a nightmare. So yeah, we're sensitive to that one.
Okay. It should be kind of a law or something like that, a country law.
Well, there's an ISO standard, which is year, month, day. I think that's what everybody should be doing, because then it sorts correctly in your file system too.
Yeah.
That's what, if you noticed, actually on my system, everything was year, month, day. I follow the ISO standard. I think that should be law, but you know.
Yeah, I saw you use this kind of date.
That's
Okay.
my preferred. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. And yeah, hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, of course, with pleasure. And I want to thank you to that you joined us. This was a great webinar. If you have another question from the audience, I don't think. אם יש לכם עוד שאלות, אז אתם מוזמנים עכשיו, לפני שאנחנו סוגרים את הוובינר הזה. ואם לא, אז אני רוצה להודות לכם שהצטרפתם אלינו, נתראה בוובינר הבא. אתם מוזמנים לבקר כמובן באתר של קן, בבלוג שלו, ולהוריד את הכלי הזה, המדהים הזה שראינו, לנסות אותו, כמו שקן אמר לכם, אתם יכולים לנסות אותו חינם. מתאים לכם, תרכשו, לא מתאים, אל תרכשו. יש שם כמה דברים שהם מאוד מאוד עצמתיים, כמו שראיתם, ובעצם זה יביא אתכם לשלב הבא ולמדרגה הבאה בעצם במקצועיות שלכם. So I want to close this webinar. I want to thank you very much, Ken, to joining us, and we'll see you maybe on the next webinars.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Good evening. Bye. Good evening to all.